everyone. This is our fifth and final hour. I had to think about it. Fifth and final hour of this candidate forum. So thank you all for participating and attending. I'd like you all to keep your phones or computers on the gallery mode so that you can see our timer. She is going to give you warnings. So there will be a 1-minute warning, a 30-second warning, and a stop warning when you're speaking. About 5 to 10 seconds after the stop, if you are still speaking, you will be muted because we have to give everyone the same amount of time to speak. So it is now 8 o'clock. And I just wanted to mention that this event is sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Cincinnati area. I am your moderator this evening, Desiree Futel. I am the Vice President of Voter Service for the League of Women Voters, Cincinnati area. We also co-sponsored this event with the Women's City Club of Greater Cincinnati, as well as the Urban League of Southwestern Ohio. So this evening, we are going to start with introductions, and our introductory question is to please introduce yourself and share your vision for the Cincinnati Police Department. We are going to be starting with, Lakeisha Cook.
Yes, can you hear me? Great. So I'm Lakeisha Cook. I'm originally from Cincinnati. I grew up here most of my life. I graduated from Withrow and then went on to get my bachelor's in political science from Wright State. I've worked with youth in mental health, also on emergency food and shelter grants on a federal level, and I've been involved with the community for a series of years. I'm really excited about this opportunity to advance Cincinnati in a way that we look at growing in community-based learning, really involving the community in how we develop, how we organize, and how we support each other. My vision for the police is to go back to creating more communal-based operations through more trainings with engaging in the community, an opportunity for the community to get to know the police a little bit more and for the police to learn us. Also, there's a high interest with the police walking the beat more, but also understanding that the police have to feel safe as well. So with that crux, I think it's time that we identify major high points of crime areas and also provide more community-based operations there with partnerships in those neighborhoods so that the community can feel more safe, and also so we can address the police doing their job that they specialize in, and how the community who specializes in community partnerships, youth relationships, mental health, develop that and ensure that they are being utilized properly.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to have Reggie Harris.
All right. Good evening. My name is Reggie Harris. I'm an endorsed Democrat for running for Cincinnati City Council. I'm a clinical social worker by training. I work in affordable housing development. I've spent the bulk of my professional career working to help people adjust to what I find are profoundly unjust circumstances in our communities in our city. And so I'm running for Cincinnati City Council to be a part of a team of folks to help shape a city where all people can thrive. My vision for the Cincinnati Police Department really is about expanding upon some of the innovative things that we've done in our police department and making sure that they are holistic and lasting. Meaning we have social workers that work with Cincinnati Police Department, but they can't transport some folks who are dealing with mental health issues, right? So an initiative that is good, but slight flaws in it. I really want to piggyback on something that Lakeisha Cook said earlier, which I agree with wholeheartedly, is about more community-oriented policing, having police officers live in the communities that they serve, having police officers have positive engagements with youth that are not always around responding to crime, but proactive engagements around just good citizenship and the social contract. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to have John Williams.
Sorry about that. Thanks. Yeah, I'm John J. Williams. I'm a lifelong Democrat, endorsed by the Charter Committee. I am a former prosecutor for the city of Cincinnati and also a solicitor. Spent 15 years working at the city with, spent a lot of times working at the police department. What I want to see out of the police department is if we stay to the principles of the collaborative agreement, which most of you probably heard of, but I was on the monitoring team that put the collaborative agreement together after the unrest in 2001. I was the only local lawyer to actually sit down with the group and all the interested parties and see the work be accomplished. That document is a tool that is the model for community relations and police and how they interact. I think the tools are already there. We just have to make sure that the various departments and council stick to those tools. There's a good framework in the collaborative agreement for how to accomplish what the other two speakers just spoke about. That's the collaboration in the community, getting out there. Police have to know the community one-on-one, and the community has to know the police one-on-one. It would help with so many things. It would help even solve some of the crimes in the neighborhoods because people would feel that they are trusted and respected by the police. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll have Logan Simmering.
Hi, so I'm Logan Simmering. I'm a union iron worker and Green Party and socialist activist and Green Party endorsed candidate for city council. My vision for Cincinnati police is one that is grounded in the democratic will of the people of Cincinnati, where people have a direct say in how the police are governed and how they're budgeted through mechanisms coming out of the community councils and our direct participation of the citizens, so that the police are serving them in the way that they feel is best, and which I imagine, but obviously this would be somewhat subject to the change of the voters themselves, would involve police being focused on the kinds of areas that they're most suited to: solving crimes, stopping terrorists, things like that, and other specialists deal with mental health issues, social work, de-escalating domestic violence, things like that, getting people into housing. And yeah, see the rest of my time.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to have Scotty Johnson.
Good evening, and thank you for having me here this evening. I'm Scotty Johnson, a endorsed Democratic candidate for Cincinnati City Council. I'm a 33-year retired veteran of the Cincinnati Police Department, and I am one of the original community-oriented police officers when community-oriented policing came to Cincinnati. The vision for the Cincinnati Police Department is one of transparency, number one. The police department has to be willing, which it is doing now, to have citizens have complete input into the policies and procedures and the way that policing is done in the city of Cincinnati. The city of Cincinnati is one of the leaders, as Mr. Williams alluded to, with the collaborative agreement. The collaborative agreement is an historical agreement between the citizens of Cincinnati and the Cincinnati Police Department. The collaborative agreement has to be one that we continuously refresh and we continuously revisit. We're going through a refresh right now as citizens of the city of Cincinnati and the police department, but that has to be an ongoing process. There has to be ongoing training between the police and the community so we establish more trust. I think we've done a decent job in the city of Cincinnati of establishing trust between the police and the community, but trust transparency, and a continuous process with the collaborative agreement is my vision for the city of Cincinnati. This has to maintain and it has to be a partnership between the police and the community. And that's the only way we continue to grow and establish the trust and the transparency necessary to make the Cincinnati Police Department the great department it has the potential to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I just want to take a moment to refresh the viewers who might have just logged in. We are sharing responses to the first question, which is to please introduce yourself and share your vision for the Cincinnati Police Department. Next, we are going to hear from Rob Harris.
Greetings to all, and thank you, League of Women Voters, for having this forum for us to express our thoughts. Greetings to all other candidates. Professionally, I'm a retail bank manager. I've been in retail bank management over 15 years now, where I understand the financial and budget income statement. In the community, where my passion lies, I have over 20 years of working with youth mentorship. I'm currently the president of the Little League West End Little Senators, the same neighborhood that I grew up in and I played with. With that, I have the opportunity to speak with parents, over 150 parents and youth, stories and some not so much, all dealing with police officers and the interactions they have, including my own. But a lot of those things that occurs growing up and I interact with parenting is one, accountability of our police in the city of Cincinnati for penalties for actions that result in misconduct. And then training, additional training and equipment is also ongoing right now. And I also want to, on a positive note, that our police city is above average in terms of our grading when you look at the research and resources that goes on. But with those three things, accountability, different penalties for actions, for misconduct, and additional training, those will be a better outcome. And that's my vision for Cincinnati Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last, we will have an introduction from Steve Gooden.
Thank you, and I apologize for being late. I was at the Equality Cincinnati forum that ran a bit over, so my apologies. Again, my name is Steve Gooden. I currently serve on City Council. I was appointed back in November of 2020, and it's been one of the great honors of my life to serve in this capacity. I have a long resume. I will just highlight a couple key parts. I mean, I was both a Peace Corps volunteer and an Army officer. I've been a federal prosecutor, a state court prosecutor, but I've also been a criminal defense attorney for over 10 years and have served on the Hamilton County Public Defenders Commission. So I have seen our law enforcement, particularly our local law enforcement, from both sides. And my vision of the Cincinnati Police Department is one of hopefully continued progress. I was a young prosecutor during the collaborative agreement of 2020 to 2002 when it was being negotiated and implemented. And at the time, that was considered very progressive policing. It banned chokeholds, it banned active racial profiling as it was understood at the time. But there's certainly much more work to do. I don't know if any of you have all seen the recent Bloomberg News report, which basically says that the city is in some ways backtracking on the original collaborative agreement. So I'm proud to say that we fully funded the Citizens Complaint Authority in the most recent budget process and helping the Citizens Complaint Authority resolve its considerable backlog of cases and adding to some transparency there and community and police relations. But we've got much more work to do, including adding some mental health response teams, including an ongoing refresh and review of tactics. But we also can't lay it all at the police's feet. We as policymakers have to do better, particularly in the marijuana laws, which continue to cause, I think, some unnecessary interactions between police officers and the community. So some of it, in my mind, falls back on the policymakers, council members to provide better direction.
Thank you so much. So I wanted to take this time to give a little context as to why we're spending so much time and energy focus on issues of policing and race. So while we feel like there are many issues that we could have brought up to City Council, the issue of policing and race is a benchmark on how candidates view their role and see the community's future. So the three organizations agreed that this was important to bring out and would be a great way for voters to differentiate amongst ideals for candidates that they want to select. So we're moving right along. Our next question is, police are being asked to respond to social, community, and health problems that may be beyond their role or training. How would you address this? And we are going to start with Rob Harris.
Thank you for that question. And when you look at the officers, their duties and responsibility, I think they have a handful in terms of their responsibilities that they're currently doing right now. So to ask them to go on roles of being an expert and analyzing sociologically or logically on when they're on duty, that's helpful. I think that's additional training, but it's so much more right at this particular time that we need to address. What you have is officers that, you know, they need proper training in a proper community that they're in. So my response to that answer is yes, there should be some additional training if we're going to enforce our dollars, our taxpaying dollars, and the budget. When you look at the budget situation and the responsibilities of doing those duties, I think a better investment will be more police tactics training and equipment that gears them towards combating the duties that they have for, and then most important, diversity and inclusion, looking at minorities in particular neighborhoods, especially the inner city where those high crime or hot spots are occurring. I think that'll be a better investment in terms of our police officers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to have Logan Simmering.
Simmering with an S. With the caveat that I think it should be deferring to solutions that come out of participatory democratic systems. My general take is that we ask the police to do too much, and that causes a lot of problems. It causes stress for the police. It causes unnecessary interactions with the public. So what we need to do is kind of disaggregate the responsibilities and offload them onto other professionals that, you know, if you called 911 for somebody who's having a mental health issue, should be responded with a mental health professional or somebody dedicated to that line of training. Or if, you know, the police are the most readily available, they should respond and be able to identify that some other line of work should be responding to that crisis. We just need to take responsibilities away from the police and put them into the most appropriate areas and have those people responding to problems. That'll do. Seize my time.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Scotty Johnson.
When we talk about police responding to issues of this magnitude, unfortunately, the police and the fire are the only two agencies that are 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, 7 days a week. And when those situations are very, very dangerous situations, they can be, we have to make sure that we extend possibly the usage of mental health professionals. Each district in the city of Cincinnati has a mental health professional working in that district, but they're not working around the clock. So one issue to address with this is to possibly extend the hours of the mental health professionals that are in each district. And when those calls for service come, that call for mental health professionals, you have those mental health professionals readily available to respond with the police, to possibly make an assessment and provide mental health care when possible. But that is a budget issue. And as a candidate for Cincinnati City Council and prayerfully a city council person, we possibly have to move some of that funding to the mental health professionals to have them readily available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. That's the issue right there. Mental health is not on a time clock. Social ills are not on a time clock. They come at 3 and 4 in the morning when only police and fire are available. So possibly stretching that to make sure those mental health professionals that are in each district are working around the clock and that are readily available to provide the services necessary when we have mental health situations. That's one of the ways in which you address those ills. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Steve Gooden.
Thank you. And, that's an excellent question. And it's one I think that really goes to the heart of our service on city council, because you're right. There's a lot of things that we get calls about and concerns from, questions from constituents that we as municipal officers have zero control over. Our local police force, we do have some input in. I think the question presumes, and is correct to presume, that sometimes the police response is not always the correct response, because police officers are trained to diffuse threats of force or defuse threats of force through threat of force or force. And there will always, unfortunately, I think in our society, be a place for that. So in my mind, the focus here should be on our dispatchers, our 911 operators, so that they can better triage the kind of situation that's involved, whether it be a mental health issue, an issue of relationship violence, or an issue where there could be some potential drug abuse involved, so that they can send someone out with the officer to help partner with the officer to find some sort of non-incarceration, non-law enforcement response to the extent that's appropriate. I will tell you, though, I used to chair the Center for Addiction Treatment, which is the leading opioid addiction treatment center here in town. There isn't a lot of appetite to just send social workers out without an armed police officer at 2 in the morning into an uncertain situation. So I think there will always be a need to partner here. But I do think the clear trend, whether it be in Dallas and Columbus and St. Louis and other cities roughly our size, the clear trend is to trying to triage a situation at 911 and involve mental health, substance abuse professionals, or whatever is appropriate, along with the police officers on the call. Replacing the police officers, in my view, is just going to get someone seriously injured or killed. And I don't think you're going to find a lot of mental health professionals who want to go without an officer.
Thank you so much. I'm going to read the question one more time for viewers that might just now be logging in. The question is, police are being asked to respond to social, community, and health problems that may be beyond their role or training. How would you address this? Next, we are going to hear from Reggie Harris.
Yeah, I too think this is an excellent question. And when I think about this question, I think about actually the breakdown of our larger institutions and our larger policy and social supports for families. So when police are responding about community, social issues that are beyond their training, we're talking about what's the results of what happens when people don't have access to housing, what happens when there aren't access to living wage jobs and capital in communities, what happens when people don't have access to healthcare and mental health care. And so as Scotty, my slate mate, really brilliantly pointed out, the systems that we have, those sort of 24-hour systems, are police and fire. But if we think beyond police responding to these needs, and we think about really investing, and we have this conversation, it's a buzz phrase, affordable housing, when we really talk about connecting people to living wage jobs, when we talk about ensuring that youth are connected to public education and they're going to school and they have year-round engagement then we start to see families have the capabilities of addressing their needs, and the police won't have to step in as often. So I actually see this not as necessarily a role for police to become social workers or to become economists or to become financial consultants, but rather for a community, rather for the city to invest in those institutions that provide those opportunities, skills, and life sets, so that communities can do right by themselves. When we see communities struggling, it's because of a lack of resource, not because of some moral deficit or failing internally.
Okay, next we are going to hear from Lakeisha Cook.
Yes, so I think that the most important thing with dealing with community issues is to have more community response. One thing that we have addressed is we always take money and we fund either a particular mother issue or a particular grandparents issue. We've never really funded programs that address all three: single fathers, single mothers, grandparents, or families together. And I think if you address and make sure that all of these operations are funded and making sure the policies don't tear people out of home situations, I feel like then you have more response as a family unit. You're able to address, affordable housing. How can we support people to own homes versus continuously renting them, which has people, not evaluating their neighborhood. Also, additionally, I think there should be more of a connection with hospitals and mental health agencies. Most mental health agencies have a crisis unit that is already set up and established. And one way that we currently need to work with them in the same alignment when we bring a person to the hospital is how can dispatch determine what mental health is. Someone with a mental health issue is not always as we've seen on TV, the worst case scenario. It could be somebody sad, someone emotionally distressed, anxiety ridden. And those also concerns could be addressed through dispatch on how to ask questions to get the right operator there. As we've seen, College Hill Mental Health Agency has expanded to address youth. So we need to make sure that if this agency or this neighborhood is addressing that, then why are we partnering with them to ensure that these people are getting the resources they need? So it's always making sure that the community gets the resources first, and then ensuring on the back end, when it is a crisis, that we are connected with people who are skilled and talented at those particular issues, and we're getting them the resources they need to the correct help.
Last, we will hear from John Williams.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that the problem, some of it's just a dialogue with the police to understand really if there is some training to be given to them where they're falling short. Just like in a lot of professions, some type of continually led could help with, I think, some of the community and social aspects that we're talking about here. The mental health piece, I think a lot of people already talked about that. So just increasing, I think, the ability of those folks who are well-trained in that to be at the scene and to work with those folks. I think that Steve's absolutely right that a lot of those folks will not go out there by themselves, and you can't replace the police in those situations. But I believe that if the police and the community got along better and they respected each other more, that some of that help could come from the community to deal with those community issues when the police are there. So when it comes down to the training, I think one is, like I said, we need to find out if it's possible that we can train our officers to take on some aspects of this stuff. And again, that's a budget issue, but sometimes you have to dig into the budget to make things correct. I believe that with any situation like this, it's a matter of understanding what people's capacities are. And if we can work within those capacities or fix those capacities, we can deal with a lot of these issues.
Thank you so much. We are going to move to our third and final question of this evening. I wanted to mention again that this event is sponsored by the League of Women Voters, Cincinnati area, the Women's City Club of Greater Cincinnati, and the Urban League of Southwestern Ohio. Our last question is Cincinnati police data shows racial disparities in police use of force against civilians. The city's population is 42% Black, yet 75% of police use of force incidents are against African Americans. How would you respond to this issue? And we are going to start this question with John Williams.
Thanks. Again, it's a training issue. We have to go back and figure out what the root cause of the disparity and the use of force is. If it's a matter of fact, if the fact of the matter is that we're getting officers who are coming in who aren't used to dealing with the African-American community or the Black and brown community, we need to go down and figure out a better way to train those folks to be comfortable with the community. Also, I think that we have to have a better understanding of, when it comes to use of force, ways to de-escalate. Again, if we look at what the collaborative agreement stated out, there are mechanisms within the collaborative agreement that put in systems in place so that things are de-escalated. Also, I think that if we are trying to determine what the real disparity is, we need to go to the community and find out under what circumstances the use of force is really being used and how the impact is coming upon them. I think that when we look at this situation, we definitely need to also look at our own rank and file. I know we've done well in the recruitment of Black and brown officers, but we can do better. I think that if we do that, I believe that there is a correlation between Black and brown officers having a better understanding and the encounters with Black and brown folks that may not make them use force. We need to look at that also. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Lakeisha Cook.
Yeah, so the first thing that I think I will support is for officers to be required to capture how many times they pull their firearms on a particular individual. I think this will also help us assess what neighborhoods actually are happening from like the officer's perspective with clear data. And then with how many times in each neighborhood are we receiving complaints? Now that we have updated the complaint unit is going to be up to date, I think it should be monthly to determine like what are the issues, are these continuous officers, and then like how are they being reported, how are they being managed, and how are they being retrained, so that we can make sure that there are through lines and consistency. And also the community agreement talks about partnerships and community engagement. One essential way to do community engagement is to have diversity, equity, and inclusion training with the community. Just as officers you're allowed to go for ride-alongs with the officers, there should be opportunities for the community to sign up and to do training with the officers. This will allow the officers, number one, to engage with the community more and to engage with different minority groups. I think having a relationship mends some of the hurt, but also it allows people to kind of understand where each other is coming from and kind of defer the operation. Sorry, I just looked at the time. In the system. So I think it's going to be important that we look at how do we perceive each other. And then finally, I'm really going to support, as Cincinnati is in the crux between Norwood and Cheviot, the state initiative that the governor wants to pass for us to make sure that every officer has a criminal background check or misconduct checks are reported before they're allowed to transfer. We need to ensure that even though we're in the middle, that any person is protected and is honored in our community.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Reggie Harris.
Yeah, so I believe really in officers living in the city and also living in neighborhoods similar to the neighborhoods that they are policing, speaking to some of the things that Lakeisha brought up about familiarity, right? These disparities happen because there is an inherent fear of Black people that's been perpetuated in the media that, you hear things about, Black communities. And when our officers don't have a deep, intimate connection with those communities, then you have reactions out of fear. So any and all of those programs that, again, allow the police to have interactions with community members that are outside of policing that humanize the person, right? Like I grew up in a very rough neighborhood, and we knew the folks who were tripping, right? We knew the folks that were probably selling drugs on the side, and the officers in the community that knew those people had a way of engaging them that didn't result in use of force because they were human people, they were humanized to them. And so, yes, that's training, but that's it has to be a consistent reinforcing that we are working with people who are human beings in complex systems, in communities, and that both the police officers and the community have to have opportunities to be mutually transformed, right? It can't be just transactional one way, but it has to be a give and take. And so at the core of that is just really about relationships, and for police officers to understand the conditions that cause crime. When we don't continue to moralize crime, but understand crime as conditions of poverty, then that changes the way the police and power impacts relationships and engagement.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Steve Gooden.
Well, look, thank you for asking this question, because it really sort of, in my view, goes to the heart of police community relations. And really the only way I can respond to it, even as a policymaker, is based upon my lived experience, which is, I grew up in a fairly tough neighborhood myself, in a very diverse neighborhood. And, I kind of had some exposure hearing from my friends who are African-American about their interactions with the police, and getting some sense as to the trauma that can come, even, from an interaction that doesn't result in an arrest or a criminal charge. It can still be an extraordinarily traumatic and even life-changing experience. So I do have at least some appreciation for that, I think. And I would start, I guess, in Cincinnati. I'll start at the top. I think the worst thing that's happened in terms of police community relations was a decision by the Ohio Supreme Court a number of years ago that did away with our residency requirement. We used to have some ability to actually have police officers live in the city that they police and live in the neighborhoods that they police. Now most of our police officers do not live in the city. And I think that actually has changed things. That's a legal issue, and it's one that we're not going to win anytime soon. But in the meantime, I'm a big believer in cultural competency training. And I'm a big believer in trying to reach across, as Reggie said, to show that actions that may seem threatening to a police officer who lives in Loveland might not actually be truly threatening. And I think that's the best way we have to reduce some of these use of force type incidents. I will say, I do think Cincinnati, our CPD, has made some pretty good progress in this department, but there is certainly and absolutely more work to be done there. But I do believe familiarity, and kind of not just familiarity, but intentional familiarity and training in that area, can indeed make a difference. It really is about recognizing common humanity.
Okay, so I want to take a moment and pause, since this is kind of a bigger group, and reread the question just in case people are just now logging on. The question is, Cincinnati police data shows racial disparities in police use of force against civilians. The city's population is 42% Black, yet 75% of police use of force incidents are against African Americans. How would you respond to this issue? And we are going to hear from Rob Harris next.
Thank you for the question. I think, like many that grew up in a tough neighborhood right here in the heart of the city in the West End, I experienced kind of that of two cities. So you had good officers, you had bad officers. Scotty Johnson was one. And first thing in the West End growing up, you can help with stereotypical officers that was in the neighborhood, predominantly Black, low income, and they addressed us as such. And this was not only disparities that's going on. That situations where we were really walking along the lines and no one is doing anything. So now you're pinpointing individuals that's innocent, that are fully just within that range in that neighborhood. Yes, we need training for those individuals that's policing in neighborhoods that they're unfamiliar with. Yes, we need training to identify those officers that think they're above the law and really do things that's out of the ordinary, because no one in the past has penalized them or held them accountable for the things that they've done. how do we look at that? Like I mentioned before, this has been going on for years. Now we created body cameras, we created ordinance, and we had things in place. Now it's time to have zero tolerance and deal with those individuals. Make sure they have the misconduct that they do or show, that we make an example and have law-abiding citizens be treated equally. And justice and equality, we need to make sure not only the elected officials on council, but then the judges as well in the courtroom are holding them accountable in terms of the crimes that they're committing to everyday citizens.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Scotty Johnson.
When we talk about use of force, unfortunately, is a not a pretty element that is used in policing. When we talk about excessive use of force, the Cincinnati Police Department, per the collaborative agreement, already has a tracking system for those officers that are involved in uses of force. What has to happen, as it's already been alluded to, accountability has to be at the highest priority when it comes to uses of force and excessive uses of force. We have to make sure that those officers that are involved in these uses of forces that are absolutely unnecessary or excessive are held accountable. We also have to make sure that the supervisors, all the way up to the district commanders, are held accountable for having officers in their districts that continue to allow uses of forces to go on. The sergeants are the frontline supervisors. The sergeants know those that are involved in uses of force. So accountability has to start at the top, from the police chief all the way down to that beat officer. And when officers reach a certain amount of uses of force in a month, in a certain time period, it used to be monthly, there were evaluations, then therefore that officer needs to be removed from the street for a time period and evaluated. I have no problem with extending the training that we're all talking about. It has to deal with mental health training, even for police officers. It's a difficult job. It's a job you will see things that you never believed you would see. And some of that takes a toll, not excusing excessive use of forces, but we have to make sure our officers are in their right minds when they're serving the citizens of Cincinnati. So transparency and accountability to excessive uses of force have to be dealt with, and termination has to be on the table for those officers that don't do it the right way and that are disrespecting our citizens. Our citizens deserve.
Thank you so much. Last, we are going to hear from Logan Simmering.
Okay, so training and accountability are all fine, that we need those, but I think to really get at this issue, we need to sort of address the root role of policing the society and the social status we've, as a society, put African Americans into. Police ultimately are there to uphold the stability of the state and to uphold the property rights of capital. And we put African Americans largely into a system which many have likened to an internal colony, exploited, precarious, and there to and used to enrich others. We need to attack the logic that underlie those. We need to invest in communities, give them greater control and sovereignty over their own destiny, allow them to be less precarious. So, that means addressing housing, creating systems of rehabilitative justice, good jobs so people have good ownership in, things like that. And it means finding ways to step down the amount of policing that is done. So that means giving more responsibility to other kinds of professionals to address issues and things like that we've all talked about, giving more control to communities over how they're policed, things like that. Just need to change how we think about how policing is done and what purpose, what role it's serving in society, and make sure it's acting in the best interest of everyone.
Thank you so much. Now we're going to take a moment to hear some closing remarks from our candidates. We're allowing candidates 1 minute to wrap up this evening. We're going to start with Steve Gooden.
Again, thank you all for organizing this, and thank you for the very thoughtful questions, particularly this year and this season where we have so many issues relating to corruption and economic development, affordable housing. I've been sort of surprised how some of the issues of policing, which were so important to so many a year ago, really haven't been coming up at a lot of the forums. So thank you for bringing that attention back. It is an absolutely, crucial and fundamental issue that this community has to keep wrestling with. And fortunately or unfortunately, Cincinnati has been at the forefront of dealing with these issues and over policing type problems since 2001. And all I can tell you is I agree with a lot of what's been said here tonight. We have to hold the officers accountable. We have to train them better. We have to involve mental health and drug professionals in these calls. But lastly, and I urge everyone here, I hope some of these folks here make it onto council, we have to do better as policymakers. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Logan Simmering.
Yeah, so thank you for hosting this. It's definitely a topic that's been a little bit ignored in this campaign cycle. So it's good to be able to discuss it. Yeah, like Steve said, we need to be addressing a lot of stuff from the policy angle. We need to look a lot at what we actually criminalize and if that is actually serving a socially positive purpose in doing so, or if we're just putting people in a harder spot. And we need to make sure that the police are responsive to the needs of the community. That's it.
Thank you so much. Next, we are going to hear from Scotty Johnson.
Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters, and thank you very much for having the guts to address this issue, as Steve alluded to, hasn't really been addressed in a lot of the forums. We have to continuously make sure that we are providing quality service to the citizens of Cincinnati, impartial, quality service to the citizens of Cincinnati. I did it for 33 years. I'm prepared to do it as a council person, as a policymaker. We have to make sure the right people are in place on council that are willing to make the difficult decisions sometime to make sure Cincinnati stays above the fray and stays a quality city. We have to make sure we elect leadership that's willing to get out of the comfort zone and do those things that are courageous sometimes, that are not popular. What's popular isn't always right, and what's right isn't always popular. Thank you very much to the League of Women Voters. Greatly appreciate this forum.
Thank you. And we are going to hear from Reggie Harris next.
Great. Thank you so much for this important conversation, League of Women Voters. I appreciate the opportunity. As we learned in our conversation that policing is an incredibly important topic, but is a topic that is intricately woven into all of the aspects of our city: jobs, healthcare, housing. And when we address policing, we're also addressing those issues. And so I urge voters to research and connect with candidates, folks like myself, folks like my slate mate, Scotty Johnson, who have a proven record and track record of history of working in communities, of solving these big issues, of understanding the interconnection of those issues. So take some time out, go to Reggie Harris, reggieforcincinnati.com, check me out. We have lots of resources on our website. And volunteer if you can, knock some doors so that we have the opportunity to vote in a new slate of council candidates and the mayor that really take us into the next decade in an optimistic, collaborative, and innovative fashion. So appreciate your time. Thank you.
And next we'll have closing remarks from Lakeisha Cook.
So I'm really excited and I thank you all. I think the most important part is that we can do this together. I think that if you look at community engagement, it means that we need to involve everyone. It's really a great time that we really support each other and get involved in the issues that we're all facing, which is housing, which is wages, which is just advocacy work. We are all trying to live here and we need to make sure that we're all honored. And doing that, making sure that the policies adhere to that, that people are also required to get to involved in the community. And I just want to thank you once again. If you want to learn more about me and my advocacy work around youth, which I really feel like will support us to go to the next level, please visit my website at votelakeshacook.com.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Rob Harris.
Thank you all once again. I echo those sentiments of the League of Women Voters for having this forum. I just want to end with some of the things and the thoughts that's going on. We spoke about. Well, every day when you're walking, we think about safe, thriving communities in the city of Cincinnati, and how does that look? So we would like the same streets that's in the heart of on the west side, McHenry, look like Paxton Avenue and Hyde Park. We would like individuals to be treated the same as people in one community in the suburbs compared to and being in an inner city. And how that occurs is the things that we spoke about: accountability, and setting the tone in terms of the elected officials that's in office. And that's one thing that I thrive to see. I want to see a Cincinnati that's one, that you can do. You can be the best you can be in one neighborhood just as well you can do it in another. So come together collectively. That'll be my vision. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Last, we're going to hear from John Williams.
Thanks for hosting. Listen, we have to get past, Cincinnati does, being one of the most segregated cities in America. This police reform, police communications and interactions, we've got to heal this racial divide. It leads to it. That's why we are in better shape than a lot of cities, because we have the collaborative agreement to work on. As folks have already talked about several times tonight, that agreement is about community collaboration. If we have to keep refreshing that document until we get it right, we need to do that. All resources that need to be set aside to do that, council has to do that. That's what I would do. We need to be better. And one way to do that is to make sure that when Black and brown folks encounter police officers, they're not afraid. But they welcome those folks and they applaud the job they're doing. That's what this is all about. And I think when we get together as a community, we can do that.
Thank you so much. And I just want to thank each and every candidate that is logged on right now. Thank you for your engagement, your participation, and your very thoughtful responses. In an effort to put this forum together, it was a whole process. I am honored that we were able to speak with 28 out of the 35 city council candidates. So I think this is a very comprehensive forum that we put together for voters to be able to hear and learn more about you. So thank you so much. I want to give a special thanks to our co-sponsor, the Women's City Club of Greater Cincinnati, as well as the Urban League of Southwestern Ohio. For our candidates this evening, you can go ahead and log off if you'd like. This concludes our City Council Forum. Thank you so much for joining us and have a great evening.